Hello everyone. Firstly, thank you very much for joining today. Just a bit of housekeeping to start. So there's water at the back if you need it, and the Wi-Fi code is here on that table. The table also has printouts of the Conservative Central Office's judgment that will be the topic of today's press conference. So we'll circulate that after Sir Alan finishes speaking. So this press conference is hosted by the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, or ICJP. ICJP is an independent organisation of lawyers, politicians and academics who support the rights of Palestinians and aim to protect their rights through the law. Today we will have Sir Alan Duncan speaking. Sir Alan is a board member of ICJP. He was Member of Parliament for Rutland and Neltham from 1992 to 2019, and he is a former foreign minister. He has had a special interest in the Middle East for over 30 years and is widely considered a Conservative Party grandee on foreign policy matters. He will present a short pre-prepared statement, which will be followed by a Q&A from the floor, and then there will be time for one-to-one interviews at the end. So I'll come back up and take the list at that point. Camera crews will be prioritised first, and then written journalists, we'll go from there. A full press release, as well as Sir Alan's statements and the CCHQ findings, will be available on the ICJP website as well. So now I will hand over to Sir Alan.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming, and my thanks to the ICJP for hosting this. Over the last 30 years, I have vocally supported the rights of Palestinians. I'm a defender of international law, the United Nations, and human rights. I have consistently criticised the illegal colonisation through settlements of land which does not belong to Israel and which is rightfully Palestinian. Although this is also the stated policy of the Conservative Party and all British governments, it has made me the target of political attack from those who believe otherwise. These attacks have come from Israel itself, but also, and in some ways more viciously, from UK-based organisations who claim to represent UK Jewish opinion. They tend to transform the presumption, or that presumption, into the defence of everything Israel does, however extreme. In April, Israel's reprisals in Gaza were at their most intense. The death toll had reached 30,000, a high proportion were women and children, hundreds of thousands were being forcibly displaced, and they were being denied food and water. In addition, the UN and UNRWA were being derided, international law was being broken, and many across the world were calling for arms sales to Israel to cease. In what was just the latest of many interventions in which I defended the importance of international law, I was interviewed on April the 4th by Nick Ferrari of LBC. In that interview, I called for an arms embargo and also accused some senior Conservative figures of not believing that illegal settlements were indeed illegal. I also accused them of promoting Netanyahu's extreme policies to the point where some should be sacked from the then government or expelled from the House of Lords. Now, what happened then is a political scandal which discredits the Conservative Party and which amounts to a McCarthyite witch hunt which is nothing less than despicable. I was contacted by the press, who had been told I was accused of being anti-Semitic and was to be put into the party's complaints procedure under threat of expulsion. Nobody at that stage from the party had contacted me. The party refused to tell me who had complained or what precisely the complaint was. All I had to go on were some comments to the press by the likes of the Board of Deputies of British Jews and the Campaign Against Antisemitism, and they accused me of peddling anti-Semitic tropes. I mean, this merely followed the regular pattern of comments from such organisations, in which anyone who criticises Israel is more often than not viciously accused of being anti-Semitic. The party broke all its own rules by telling the press before telling me, by not saying what clause of their code I was supposed to have violated, and by refusing to give me a copy of the complaint I was required to answer. I nonetheless was required to offer a defence. So rather than just resign from the party in disgust, I engaged lawyers at considerable personal expense to see off what I considered were false allegations. It was therefore hardly surprising that CCHQ withheld their adjudication for a number of weeks until after the general election. I have now received the panel's findings. Their exact words are as follows. I quote, "The panel concluded that the complaint could not be upheld for two reasons. One, the respondents' comments did not go beyond political debate and so were not regulated by the code. Or two, as a matter of fact in this case, the respondents' comments were not anti-Semitic and could not properly be regarded as such." Unquote. I have thus been totally exonerated. Now, it would be heartening to assume, although sadly unrealistic ever to expect, that the same intense press coverage which was given to the accusation in April will now be given to the outcome. Now, I'd like to think that this would be the end of the matter, but what has been revealed in the adjudication has taken this episode from bad to worse. It turns out that there was no formal complaint. What in fact happened was that in response to the flurry of press activity, the party itself converted public comments into a complaint, which the party itself levelled against me and treated as if it were a formal complaint, even though none such even existed. The panel stated in its accompanying note, and again I quote, "The panel understood that this was not a matter where any formal complaint had been submitted to the party, so a copy could not be provided to the respondent. Rather, it was a matter that had come to the party's attention and been taken on by the party as complainant." Unquote. So I've been put through a complaints procedure which was potentially highly damaging to my reputation when there hadn't even been a complaint. It was in fact a political decision by invisible actors who have not come forward. It was the product of precisely the sort of corrupt collusion I have identified and criticised. Now, I commend the panel for their integrity and thoroughness. The three members on it have behaved impeccably throughout. But certain people in the party have not, and we need to know who they are. What we have seen is a perfect example of the underhand collusion that has existed for so long between immoderate defenders of Israeli extremism and figures at the top of the Conservative Party, both inside and outside Parliament. They've tried to threaten me, but I will not be bullied or silenced. When it comes to accusations of anti-Semitism, we're not equal under the law. Where the IHRA definition has been adopted as the benchmark for conduct, there is no equivalent benchmark for those who feel wrongly accused or who consider their attackers to be the real extremists. Where anti-Semitism genuinely exists, it should be ruthlessly called out. But it should not be artificially used to divert attention from legitimate comment on Israel. The attacks on me have been vexatious and unjustified, as the panel concluded clearly. Now, I consider myself free to repeat everything I said in my evidence to the party's complaints process, and I will consider publishing all of it. At its heart is the perverse, and I would argue corrupt, relationship between the Conservative Friends of Israel and the top of the Conservative Party. This has gone on for too long. Money, improper influence, and the promotion of Israeli interests above our own have contributed to the destruction of the UK's independent foreign policy. They've also undermined UNRWA, the UN, and international law, and it all comes at the expense of innocent Palestinians. You need no greater evidence of this than the total silence we saw about Gaza during the election campaign. Likewise, nor was there a squeak about the acceleration of illegal settlement building and repulsive settler violence in the West Bank. These issues have been buried more quickly than Gaza's 40,000 dead. Now, the election of a Labour government has injected some rays of hope into this tragic issue. The appointment of Richard Hermer as Attorney General is highly encouraging, and it's to be hoped that the Prime Minister's own record as a human rights lawyer will inspire him to be courageous and principled. The few months before the US election offer him a window of opportunity to reassert UK policy on adherence to international law. But if the Conservative Party is to recover, it cannot do so without admitting and addressing this poison in its midst. It must start by answering clearly some crucial questions about its conduct on the issue I'm addressing today. What happened in CCHQ? Who made the decision to shape and adopt this complaint? Who instructed a press officer to notify the media? What contact was there about this between CFI, the then party chairman, Oliver Dowden, or any others? Will the party now undertake to decouple itself from CFI and direct its efforts to supporting Jewish people within the UK, separate from defending Israeli excess? Will the party perhaps at last come clean on who paid for Priti Patel's trip to Israel, after which she was sacked as Development Secretary? So will the press put each and every Conservative leadership contender on the spot about their adherence to international law and the illegality of settlements? Now, these are but a few of the many questions the press, I think, should be asking about this long-running scandal. So, in summary, we must all adhere to international law and uphold the activity of its institutions, its courts, and the people who work within them. In doing so, I will not be bullied or silenced, and I hope all decent journalists and public figures will assist in that endeavour. Thank you. I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Sir Alan, for that. So, yes, please raise your hands and I'll go to you one by one. I will go to LBC. Still a member of the Conservative Party? You could remain one? Yep, sure.
Oh, yes. It's not members of the Conservative Party like me who have, as it were, gone off track. It is some people at the top of the Conservative Party. And I think that judgment has clearly been made recently by the British electorate. I deliberately and will continue to remain a member of the Conservative Party. Otherwise, it would appear in the eyes of many to be an admission of defeat. I'm not going to be defeated on this. I'm not going to run away from the issue, and I'm not going to be bullied.
Thank you.
And by the way, my thanks to LBC for giving me the launch pad for this issue in my interview with Nick Ferrari.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else have any questions.
I just had a question about the feeling within the Foreign Office, because obviously, as you said, there's a poison in the mix of the Conservative Party, and effectively seems at the moment there isn't an independent British foreign policy when the Conservatives in power because of the power of CFI. But obviously, there's a lot of people working in the Foreign Office. You were a minister yourself. Are people aware of this issue, and is there internal dissent against what this control that is being exerted by foreign power on our own foreign policy?
My experience when in the Foreign Office is there is a lot of deep concern amongst officials and ambassadors about this undue influence. It is tempered, of course, by not wanting to be at odds with the United States, and the next few months will be critical in that judgment. And that's always been the problem, that we don't dare sort of express our view clearly for fear of being at odds with the US president. But I think that what is crucial is that we do have our policy, but even the policy we do have is not properly supported by many in our own government, and that is my point. And there are senior figures in the Conservative Party who essentially have gone behind the backs of due and proper government processes, behind the backs of the Foreign Office, to work directly into and through Number 10 in order to distort that policy and not properly apply it. That is the problem. And in my interview on LBC, I named those names. We've obviously had an election since, but now that that election is over, I would urge the best of British journalism to dig a bit deeper and ask the second layer questions. I would also ask journalists, when they're given a quote by those who claim to represent Jewish opinion, to ask them the second layer questions. Do you believe in the illegality of settlements? And if they refuse to answer or say no, then you know that you're dealing with someone who is not a moderate, decent, law-abiding person, and that should be held to account. So that is where I think there is a lot missing in journalism, and I'd urge now people to concentrate on this issue at greater depth and not just take people's words without further questioning.
Thank you. We'll go to the gentleman in the blue shirt now. I would also just like to ask good journalists say their name now.
Yes, I'm Tim Sticking from the National. We spoke before the election.
We did.
So therefore, a question on the election. You said there was total silence on Gaza, but of course there were a few pro-Gaza independents elected. Is that a welcome development in that it puts pressure on Labour to shift its position on that?
I think it was inevitable, because when you have the most burning issue in foreign policy still occurring, and you try and bury it during the election, there's going to be a reaction. And I think there was concern that the mentions of a possible Palestinian state on the hand by both parties were lukewarm. And in fact, on the Conservative Party, if you read the manifesto, there was almost nothing about foreign policy whatsoever. The words in the Labour manifesto were very much better, and some of the words we've heard from the new Prime Minister since are encouraging. I think events in the United States and what now appears to be the likely election of Donald Trump will make people more cautious again, which is complicating. But we should have the courage of our own convictions. We are a member of the P5 of the United Nations. We used to have the mandate 100 years ago, describe it as you wish, but that's an historical fact. And it leaves us with an obligation over 100 years after the Balfour Declaration to complete the second half of that promise. And I think that we have lost our confidence, our conviction, and our moral standing by being, I think, lukewarm at best, in denial at worst on this issue. So I hope that the new government and David Lammy's visit to Israel this week at least is a start, but without a Palestinian state, really this is going to remain a very imbalanced argument. Back to LBC.
Sorry, can I just come back on this? You just sound a lot warmer on Labour's foreign policy than you do on the Conservatives. I wonder whether you consider defecting to Labour if this is something you feel really strongly about.
No, I will not defect to Labour. I will make my stand within the Conservative Party. Thank you for that kind offer. I've been a member of the Conservative Party for 50 years. I have been very depressed about its domestic conduct and its loss of foreign policy conviction over the last few years. But the only way to participate in politics is to say what you think and to stick with your beliefs. So I'm not a socialist, so I'd find it difficult to join the Labour Party. But as all Conservatives should, I believe in international law and the principles behind that international law. And I also am very familiar with the politics of the Middle East. And I think that our reputation amongst people who are natural friends there has, over the last few years, absolutely plummeted. And it needs to be revived and retrieved. People look to the UK as a source of decency, leadership, conviction, and intellectual and moral integrity. And over the last few years, all of those qualities have been seriously lacking.
Yeah, hi, Simon Hickler, Middle East Eye. I've got two questions.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions. You seem quite optimistic about prospects for the Labour administration. You talked about rays of hope, and you talked about the Foreign Secretary's visit to Israel. I just wondered if you could comment on the optics of this photo with Prime Minister Netanyahu, given the serious allegations that he faces, charges in the war crimes at the ICC.
Well, having a photograph of Netanyahu never offers good optics, but it can be politically necessary. So I think one has to accept the realities of political visits, and indeed all diplomacy. That diplomacy with people you like and agree with is easy. Diplomacy is all the more necessary when you're dealing with people you find difficult. Your next question.
Thank you. The second question concerns your case. I just wondered, in terms of the questions that you raised about what you discovered from the judging yourself about the fact that there was no formal complaint, and that you can't now get to the bottom of who initiated the complaint. Are you planning any further action yourself to get to the bottom of those issues?
I'm contemplating further action, but my first stage in this is to urge you as responsible journalists to do what you can to flush out the truth. I think that what happened was an attempt to silence, certainly during the general election campaign, but also far beyond that. But they have not succeeded in discrediting me. Quite the opposite. They've shown that what I have been saying is right. And the issue of the top of the party siding with extremist rather than moderate Israeli policy has been going on for many, many years. And the people who've been doing that, and the flow of money and the influence behind the scenes that attaches to it, need to be exposed. And an important part of this process is to home in on what will soon be a leadership election in the Conservative Party, where some of the contenders are at the very, very extreme end of the spectrum on this issue and need to be exposed very, very clearly and need to be made to commit to international law and a belief in the illegality of settlements.
Thank you. Kieran Stacey from The Guardian. Can I just clarify, are you accusing CFI of having anything to do with your investigation? And secondly, can I get you to clarify your comments just now about Tory leadership? Who are you worried about?
I think it's inevitable that CFI did their utmost to persuade the party to put me into a complaints procedure. After all, there was press comment from Campaign Against Antisemitism, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and the CFI. And in particular CFI, because obviously I had named Lord Pollack and Lord Pickles. In terms of the potential leadership contenders, I think Suella Braverman is just off the scale on this, and describing all the marches in defense of Palestinian justice as hate marches was contemptible. I think she has disqualified herself from any serious candidacy. Robert Jenrick is a bit better, but not much. Priti Patel has form on this, as I mentioned earlier, and again, questions need to be asked, even though it was about an incident some years ago. But I suspect she won't stand. So I think the lineup is looking very, very questionable, and those are the two who I would name as being unacceptable on this issue, and indeed I named them in my interview on LBC on April the 4th. You had a second question, which was you have a no, you've done it. Okay, yep. Any more for any more? Matt Kennard, ladies first, maybe.
You have the local Al Jazeera. So you've been exonerated, but
Yes.
you still don't know who was behind the problems that you had. How worrying is that for you and for people like yourself in the Conservative Party, as well as in the other parties like the Labour Party, where we saw Jeremy Corbyn being purged out of the party because of antisemitism? And is there anything that the political parties are doing in order to avoid or to prevent any kind of damage that's causing to the reputation of the parties and of the United Kingdom in general?
Where anti-Semitism definitely exists, it should be rooted out. I feel that very, very strongly. It's unacceptable in any form. But where there is not anti-Semitism, the accusation of such should not be used to try and stop legitimate comment on Israel. And we all know there is a difficulty of the conflation between domestic Jewish opinion, or what people claim to be Jewish opinion, and the conduct and defense of Israel. The two, in large part, are separate and should remain so. And so, what I sometimes call abuse Semitism is where an unjustified accusation of anti-Semitism is used to bully or silence is not acceptable. So there are some equal and opposite forces in play here. I think in terms of the Conservative Party, this has gone on for too long. There has been a collusion at the very top, born of money, donor money, and everything I've described both in my book and in my comments today. And this improper relationship should be dismantled.
I've got two questions. So, firstly, on the anti-Semitism issue, obviously you've been exonerated now, but as you said, some damage will have been done to your reputation. How dangerous do you think it is that this weaponization of anti-Semitism? Because obviously we all want to root out real anti-Semitism wherever it is, but accusing defenders of Palestinians of anti-Semitism seems to me to actually make fighting real anti-Semitism much harder because it muddies the water. That's the first question. Second question is the role of the media, which you hinted at. Why do you think the media doesn't cover Israeli influence in the way, say, they cover Russian influence, which everyone knows about, and the general population is very aware of Russian influence in the UK, but the media barely covers Israeli influence, which I would say is much worse. Why do you think that is, and does that need to change for really this issue to get the oxygen it needs for something to change?
On your first question, I think that unjustified accusations of anti-Semitism used for other purposes is very damaging to the Jewish community. And I find that upsetting, and I think it is really very worrying. It's not in their interest. And I think that some of those who claim to be the voice of the Jewish community are particularly extreme and do not represent the Jewish community, where I think we should be supporting moderate Israelis and moderate Palestinians, and those who are the vast majority in this country who go about their daily business as Jewish people, not feeling the same sort of aggressive sentiments as those who keep on releasing aggressive press releases. Your second point was just on the media. I think, I don't know how to put this, some of them get bullied or cowed or just sort of made to feel that it's too disturbing to bother to go about it, that, you know, they get abused on social media. There might just be one person in the workplace who takes offense and accuses them of anti-Semitism. There's a very difficult climate for a lot of people in companies, in media institutions, and just going about their daily life, who say, I don't dare touch that issue because someone's going to have a go at me. And that is not a good thing. If it's a matter of justice, and it's behind me, we're talking about international justice, in this case for Palestinians, then we should not be bullied into silence. Otherwise, we're letting down those who at the moment are being smashed to bits in Gaza and the West Bank.
Yeah.
My name is Ray Hamilton. I'm also from Palestine. I wanted to ask, do you think you're in a minority within the Conservative Party? Spoken about Palestinian justice and Israeli crimes, Israeli extremism, and breaches of international law. As you said, the lineup when it comes to the upcoming Tory Party election is not looking very good on this issue. Have you spoken to other Tories within your party, be they MPs or Lords or what have you, who are of a similar opinion to you?
I'm in a minority because most people don't dare, because they'd rather have an easy life. But most people don't know. I think there's a real lack of understanding about the history and the facts. And it's very difficult to teach people when so many of them as candidates, now members of parliament, have been on paid trips to Israel, support or paid for by the Conservative Friends of Israel. Well, they're basically brainwashed. And then they don't dare depart from that for fear of aggressive attacks on so many levels. So a lot of people are bullied into this. That's the don't dare. But they don't know because they haven't had the chance properly to understand what's going on in the West Bank and Gaza, partly because it's much more difficult to travel there. The funding is not there for them to have equivalent such visits. And as soon as they do it, they are attacked in their political base back here. So it's a very, very pernicious political climate. I used to chair the Conservative Middle East Council, which was an attempt to build friendships, liaison and understanding with the Arab world in the same way as sort of Kabul do so well, and medical aid for Palestinians. And CMEC has been under concerted attack now for 5 years. Charlotte Leslie, the Director General, has been taken to court by a particular person and has had a very, very hard and difficult time, but she's been very brave. So I think the climate of fear perhaps sums up why people are not prepared to make a stand.
I'm Simon Charles from the Bar Media. You mentioned Suella Braverman's comments about hate marches. I wonder if you could just say a bit more about how they were characterised in the press and by politicians, and what your thoughts on public displays of solidarity with Palestine is.
I'm fully in support of the marches, but I utterly condemn violence and vandalism. And I would urge anyone who supports the Palestinian cause not to do anything that undermines it by making gestures or conducting stunts which offend the basic decent sentiments of people in the country. So don't go to the cenotaph, don't smash windows, don't say things in phrases which are not sensibly thought through, and stick to the basic principles. Now, one of the main principles of or statements that's been made is we want a ceasefire. Well, all of us here I am in favour of a ceasefire. I also have argued for an end to selling arms to Israel. But the fundamental principle is that settlements are illegal. That's the starting point. It's taking Palestinian land over many decades, which is the origin of this problem. The message, the principled message to Israel is, get out of Palestine, it's not your country.
If there's a final question, we'll have it, but yeah, and then we'll move on to one-to-one. But I think Alan's keen to people as well.
Yesterday, David Dunn in Israel was reported by Ma'arif newspaper, Israeli newspaper, is saying that the new government will stick to what the path that the conservative government has followed in terms of asking from the ICC not to issue a arrest warrant on the, or questioning the arrest warrant that the ICC is planning to issue to Netanyahu on his own offshore. Questioning the FCBO, they refused to confirm that he said that he was saying that it's a new government that is on the process of putting its own kinds of stuff in terms of the ICC, but there is respect for the rule of law. Do you think that they would follow the path that the conservative government has started in terms of stopping this warrant to issue?
I thought the recent comments from what was then the Conservative government effectively rejecting the ICC and its process was itself not acceptable. If we are signatories to an international treaty which has set up a court, we should follow and support that court. The same applies to the United Nations. So what we've seen over the last few years is the rise of politicians who think they can challenge the propriety of institutions of which they are a part or to which they are a signatory. That's not acceptable. So if the ICC takes a step, it should be supported as an organisation to which we are a signatory. We should not just think we're entitled to second guess it. So I hope the new Labour government will support international institutions in the way that they should.
Okay, great, thank you. I think we'll wrap up the Q&A section there, but we'll be able to move on to one-to-ones now. So, given that the camera's already at the back, I think we'll have Sir Alan go to the back to do the one-to-one.